Is olive oil good for you? Olive oil has a reputation for being heart healthy, but some studies suggest a negative effect on our arteries. Flow-mediated dilation, or FMD, is a measure of artery wall function. Eating olive oil can cause a drop in FMD a couple hours later, suggesting that our artery walls are sluggish. Does that mean olive oil is bad for you? It's very tricky to label things as good or bad based on an individual test, like FMD. You know what else can lower FMD? Exercise. Or sleeping. How can a drop in FMD and sluggish arteries be a part of something good, like exercise or sleep? Because things like physical activity and diet have a broad impact on our physiology and cause many different changes in our body. For example, olive oil can also lower inflammatory molecules. It can also dampen the rise of LDL cholesterol after a meal. Point is, by focusing on a single pixel, we might miss the big picture. Here's another example. High blood pressure is not good, and yet our blood pressure rises during exercise. And that doesn't make it unhealthy. You know what else raises blood pressure? Sex. Wait, how do we know that? Because brave scientists have studied people in the privacy of the bedroom during sexual activity. Okay, little creepy. They even looked at different sexual positions. Male on top and male on bottom raised blood pressure equally. So the researchers don't recommend one over the other. Sorry, the jokes just write themselves. Who said science is boring? Okay, you get the point. We decide if something is good for us or bad for us based on all the evidence, the full picture. Focusing on pockets of data is exactly how people get confused about nutrition. We're not saying that FMD and artery function don't matter. Lower FMD is associated with cardiovascular risk, so we're not dismissing it. But longer-term studies looking at the effect of olive oil for months show an improvement in FMD, not a worsening. This meta-analysis pulled together 8 studies and concluded that flow-mediated dilatation, or FMD, was increased in individuals subjected to olive oil interventions. And each of those studies lasted months. It's not an acute change after a meal. Now, I'm a little skeptical of that claim. Some of those studies used very small doses of olive oil. Others had differences in the diets between the groups that could confuse things. So we can doubt the claim in the benefit of olive oil, but the evidence certainly doesn't support a worsening of FMD long term. So saying that olive oil causes heart disease because it bumps FMD acutely is like saying that exercise causes heart disease because it bumps blood pressure acutely, or that eating an apple causes diabetes because it bumps blood glucose acutely. It's knee-jerk science. And all these considerations about FMD, short-term, long-term, still miss the main point. That at the end of the day, what we really want to know is risk of actual disease, not markers. So what effect does olive oil have on heart disease? People who eat more olive oil have lower risk of heart disease and even lower risk of death of any cause. So does that nail it? Is olive oil good for you? We can't jump to conclusions here either. It could be a coincidence. People who eat more olive oil could also eat less butter, or they could eat more salad. And maybe those habits make them healthier, not the olive oil per se. Again, we have to look at all the evidence, not pockets of data out of context. What we need is to split people randomly and ask half to eat more olive oil and watch what happens. The so-called randomized control trial. That eliminates a lot of doubt. The most famous one is Predimed, which looked at Mediterranean diets supplemented with either nuts or olive oil. They found a similar benefit, lower cardiovascular risk in both. But Predimed has some caveats and a tricky history, so we'll take that with a grain of salt as well. Other studies indicate that olive oil can improve glucose levels and prevent oxidative stress. Now, we can be extra skeptical and say the data is not convincing enough. I don't believe that olive oil is good for us. And I don't think that's an unreasonable position. But I don't see how we can make a case that olive oil causes heart disease and olive oil is bad for us in the opposite direction of the bulk of the evidence. That's not evidence-based. And I don't have a horse in this race. I'm not pro or against olive oil. I don't buy it personally, not because I think it's going to kill me, but because I don't see the need. But that's a personal call. That doesn't mean we're going to make stuff up. Let's take an objective look at the data, tell people the whole truth, and let them make their own decision. Now, I know a lot of people who watch my videos like to stick to whole foods and get their fats from nuts, seeds, and avocados. Nobody's going to argue with that. You're doing great. But you're also a unicorn. And the question is whether 99% of people out there need to stop eating olive oil yesterday, otherwise they get heart disease. And I don't see how we can reasonably argue that. Wait, what about the calories? Olive oil is super concentrated in calories, right? Absolutely. 9 calories per gram. Nothing has more calories than that. And for anyone with weight issues, that's something to bear in mind. But we have to understand what we're saying. Olive oil is not fattening per se. A lot of people on keto diets, on high-fat diets, eat substantial amounts of olive oil, and yet they lose weight because they're still hypocaloric in general. So the key is total balance of calories, not a specific food. Sure, everything else being equal, olive oil adds calories. And if you start drenching every meal with it, it adds up real quick. But that doesn't mean the oil is bad. It's a strategy decision. For some people, eliminating oil can be an easy way to cut calories, while others can maintain a healthy weight or even trim down while including oil. It all depends how you structure your diet. But isn't olive oil really high in saturated fat? And saturated fat is bad, right? Doesn't that mean olive oil is bad for us? Yeah, it's highish, 14% of calories from saturated fat. But cashews are 13%. Macadamia nuts are 15%. Brazil nuts are over 20%. So if we're excluding olive oil because of the saturated fat content, we have to exclude some nuts too. And yet the evidence doesn't show that any of these foods cause heart disease. They may even help prevent it. So yes, saturated fat is a valid concern in general, but it's a little more complicated than that. I actually have a whole video on saturated fat coming soon. For now, let's just say that we're better off thinking in terms of entire foods or even dietary patterns. Which foods and which dietary patterns are health promoting and which are not. It's a more actionable mindset and it's less confusing. Now, a lot of people who subscribe to this idea of olive oil is bad for you associate it with the work of some famous doctors like Caldwell Esselstyn and Dean Ornish. And this goes back to their studies where they saw a shrinking of artery plaque on very low-fat diets. And if you have established heart disease and you're trying to reverse it and you want to play it safe, no oils, very low-fat diet, I don't see a problem with that. In your shoes, I might do the same. But does that mean we have to tell the whole world that olive oil is poison? There's this tendency in nutrition of wanting everything to be black and white, all or nothing. And that creates a lot of confusion. The reality is that there's a lot of nuance and individual variation. Take a look at this paper on controversial foods for cardiovascular health. The authors split foods into those with evidence for harm, inconclusive, and evidence of benefit. They put extra virgin olive oil in the beneficial group and recommend it in moderate quantity. They write, there is consistent evidence of its beneficial effect on cardiovascular disease risk markers and morbidity and mortality. There is sufficient evidence to recommend its use. Okay, but who cares, right? These authors think olive oil is a good idea. We trust Esselstyn and Ornish above the gods on Mount Olympus, and we don't care what anybody else says, right? Except Esselstyn and Ornish are both co-authors on this paper. It was published in 2017, long after Ornish and Esselstyn published their trials showing plaque reversal. So even the marquee names for the no-oil movement acknowledge that there's nuance and that the balance of evidence does not say that olive oil is bad for us, period. It depends on a lot of factors. What about blood lipids, cholesterol, and all that? It's actually not super clear. I've seen studies where adding olive oil had no effect on blood lipids, and some even suggest an advantage in some settings, while others show nuts lowering total cholesterol and triglycerides more than olive oil. So if you choose to have some olive oil and you have great blood lipids, I don't see a problem. But if you have cholesterol problems, and you've already dealt with the main dietary issues, which we covered in a previous video, and your levels are still not where you want them, then olive oil is something you may want to try playing with and see if it makes a difference for you. Okay, what about cooking with olive oil? A lot of people refer to the smoke point, which is the temperature at which the oil starts to burn, and it's around 200 degrees Celsius. But there's another potential issue. Heating olive oil has been shown to increase advanced glycation end products, or AGEs. They're chemical compounds that can play a pro-oxidant role. Even just cooking olive oil for 5 minutes at 100 Celsius was enough to increase AGEs. Now, this is a little bit of a black box because we don't know exactly where the threshold is, where AGEs start being a problem. So it's possible that this increase won't matter physiologically. But if you choose to have olive oil and you want to play safe, one option is to have it on your salad or after cooking, maybe cook in vegetable broth or water. Some people saute in water. And steaming and boiling seem to limit AGEs as well. Also, if you're going to have olive oil and you have the choice, go with extra virgin. It's richer in polyphenols, and many studies have shown more beneficial effects with polyphenol-rich oil as opposed to the refined versions, like light olive oil. Last point I want to make. Nutrition should be rooted in the real world. For the vast majority of people out there, eating more olive oil would actually be a huge upgrade. Assuming it replaces worse fats, Some of the most vicious nutrition wars I've seen on social media were not over sugar or bacon. They were over olive oil. And I'm sure I'm going to hear some words in the comments because this topic always ruffles feathers. So let me extend an olive branch, pun intended. Nobody needs olive oil. It's a choice. It's entirely possible that olive oil is not right for you, but that it makes sense for somebody else. In other words, whether olive oil is good for you or bad for you is less about the oil and more about the you. For more on the different types of fats and their health effect, check out this video. And this one focuses specifically on saturated fat.
Say.